very interesting to know about the approach towards like scaffolding and the slow build up of confidence for the student. Just in general, why is it important to include interventions in a student's learning, particularly for 11 to 14-year-olds?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a very important question, Henry, because it is vital. If a student misses a concept in maths and doesn't understand it, as I said with the building blocks, if they never really understood fractions, for example, they're never really going to have a full grasp of ratio. So you need to, this is where the access tests and so on are so important, because that helps you to identify, okay, so they haven't fully understood fractions. And so at that point, you want to intervene, and you want to intervene quickly before they're required to move on to those other concepts that require the understanding of fractions. So I don't know, formulae like speed equals distance over time, that's essentially a fraction or a division. And then there's, ratio, then there's percentages. There's so many concepts that are dependent on, say, fractions. And that's the same with so many concepts in maths. It's building the whole time. So if we don't find opportunities for intervention at a point where a student doesn't understand, it's not just that concept they're not understanding. It's like everything that builds on that. So interventions are incredibly important, incredibly important.
And again,
Marie,
sorry.
I was just going to ask about those building blocks in English. And the
multitude of building blocks, the multitude of different concepts that are required for maths are not replicated with English. So in a way, it makes it more simple. But the same approach, a completely skills-based approach. So a student working in the 11 to 14-year-old range who has never fully grasped how to skim a text, is then going to find it harder to read that text aloud, is then going to find it difficult to scan for answers if they haven't interacted with the text in that fundamental way to get an overview before they even start decoding and reading. So the SHINE interventions give the opportunity in every intervention to revisit and revitalize that skim skill before the student goes on to reading it aloud or reading it internally, dependent upon how the intervention is delivered, and then analysing questions, and then learning how to scan for those answers, and then learning how to express those answers. Too many interventions can provide students with too much material, not enough questions, not enough opportunities to practice, as Naomi says. And so this skills-based approach is something, as I say, that I would have loved when teaching.
Just building on, sorry, Henry, just to interrupt again, just building on what Marie said, it's about recognizing those hurdles that might have tripped students up. So it's about going much, much slower. So for example, if you're teaching students about measuring angles, so many of us would just start with the protractor and where to place the protractor. Well, in an intervention, before you even get to that point, you might actually look at a protractor and start to look at the different scales on the protractor and why are there two zeros and why is the protractor curved, and actually spend some time looking at that particular mathematical piece of kit that you're going to be using, rather than jumping straight into using a protractor and how to use it to measure angles. So, and the same with language, if you're talking lowest common multiple, you might spend some time just checking that students know what the word common means. Or constant speed, do they understand the word constant? Or even substitution in algebra, do they understand, they'll understand probably substitute from substitute players on a football pitch. Well, it's the same thing. You're swapping in players, you're swapping letters for numbers. But actually, when we're teaching maths, do we stop to check students understand this language, check students really understand what they're looking at when they're looking at a protractor? No, we probably don't, because we're so focused on, right, we want students to substitute into formulae, or right, we want students to measure angles. So it's about taking, for Marie and for me in both our subjects, it's about taking a step back and thinking about what are those hurdles that might be tripping students up in terms of their understanding, and addressing those in the interventions to make sure all those hurdles are removed.
I think that's a really interesting point to talk about, how connected English and maths actually are. I think a lot of the time, particularly when I was at school, we saw you were two polar opposites. You were either good at English or you were good at maths, but they are so closely connected, and I think that's a really good thing to highlight here.